The scent of pine and winter frost hung in the air as I stepped into the great hall. My shoulders hunched against the collective gaze of the pack. Torches flickered against stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a caged bird sensing danger. Tonight was the winter solstice gathering, a celebration for most, but another exercise in invisibility for me. "Aurora," my sister Elise whispered, nudging me forward. "Don't linger by the entrance. You know how they talk." I did know. The rejected Omega, they called me. Too weak to fight, too stubborn to submit, too strange to belong. My blonde hair, almost silver in certain light, hung loose around my face, a curtain I could hide behind when the stairs became too much. I tugged at the sleeve of my simple blue dress, wishing for the 100th time that I had stayed in our small cottage at the edge of the territory. The pack moved like water around a stone, parting and reforming to avoid touching me. Even in a room packed with over 100 werewolves, I stood in a perfect circle of emptiness. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "The world fears what it cannot understand, little one, but silence holds wisdom that shouting never will." Before she died, she had given me her silver pendant, a crescent moon embracing a tiny star. I touched it now, drawing strength from the cool metal against my fingertips. Grandmother had been different too, teaching me the old ways, the forgotten language of hands that humans once used before our kind adopted their speech. I made my way toward the refreshment table, keeping my eyes down. The Alpha King, Magnus Silverthorn, sat on his elevated throne at the far end of the hall, his massive frame tense even in repose. His council surrounded him, a barrier of muscle and status. To his right sat an empty chair, the Queen's place, vacant since her death 5 years ago. To his left, I nearly dropped my cup when I saw him, the Alpha Prince, Magnus's only son. Unlike his father, who was all hard angles and dark features, the prince was leaner, with chestnut hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of amber honey. He sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on some middle distance, seeing everything and nothing. I had glimpsed him before, but always from afar. The Mute Prince, they called him, damaged, broken, unfit to lead, though never within the king's hearing. As I watched, a council member approached the prince, said something with a smirk, then walked away without waiting for any acknowledgement. The prince's expression never changed, but something in the slight tightening of his jaw made my chest ache. I recognized that pain, the isolation, the wall between himself and others. My sister appeared at my elbow. "Don't stare," she hissed. "Remember what happened to Lena when she tried to speak to him last spring?" I remembered. Lena had been banished to the outer territories for disrespecting royalty, but I had seen the incident. She had spoken to him as if he were stupid, loud and slow, treating his silence as a mental deficiency rather than a physical one. "I'm going to get some air," I murmured, slipping away before Elise could protest. The balcony extended from the western wall of the great hall, offering a view of the moonlit forest and mountains beyond. The cold bit into my skin, but I welcomed it after the stifling atmosphere inside. Snow had begun to fall, tiny crystalline flakes that dissolved on the stone railing beneath my palms. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I turned, startled by the deep voice. Damon Reed, the captain of the guard, stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light from inside. His dark eyes raked over me with unconcealed interest that made my skin crawl. "I needed some air," I said, taking an instinctive step back. "An Omega like you should be more careful." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. "There's talk of rogues crossing our northern border, but I could offer protection to a pretty thing like you." Every Omega in our pack knew what protection meant from wolves like Damon. Subjugation, ownership. "My sister is expecting me," I said, trying to step around him. His arm shot out, blocking my path. "Your sister? The only beta who couldn't secure a mate?" His laugh was cruel. Not much protection there. I was trapped between the stone railing and his imposing frame. Panic rose in my throat as his hand reached for a strand of my hair. A soft noise, something between a cough and a growl, came from the shadows at the far end of the balcony. Damon froze, then straightened immediately. "My prince," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "I didn't realize you were out here." The prince stepped into the moonlight, his expression unreadable. He made a curt gesture toward the door. "Of course," Damon said, backing away. "I was just ensuring the Omega's safety." He shot me a look that promised this wasn't over before disappearing inside. I stood frozen, suddenly alone with the Alpha heir. He regarded me silently, his head tilted slightly as if puzzled by my presence. Up close, I could see the scar that ran from his right temple down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, the wound that had stolen his voice as a child, according to pack whispers. The silence stretched between us. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I raised my hands and began to sign. "Thank you for your help." His eyes widened, genuine surprise breaking through his carefully neutral expression. For several heartbeats, he simply stared at my hands as if they were rare birds that had alighted before him. Then, slowly, his own hands rose. "You speak the silent language?" My breath caught. "My grandmother taught me. She said it was the old way, from before the change." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No one has spoken to me like this since my mother died." The admission sent a pang through my chest. 5 years of silence. Not because he couldn't communicate, but because no one had bothered to learn how. "I'm Aurora," I signed, then hesitated before adding, "The rejected." His brow furrowed. Rejected by whom? The question was so simple, yet no one had ever asked it. I had carried the label for so long that it had become part of my identity. "Everyone," I answered honestly. He studied me for a moment before his hands moved again. "I am Evander." Just his name. Not Prince, not Alpha heir. Just Evander. A commotion from inside interrupted us. The ceremony was about to begin. Evander's shoulders tensed, his momentary openness vanishing behind a mask of royal indifference. "I should go," I signed, suddenly conscious of how inappropriate this interaction would appear to others. Evander nodded, but as I turned to leave, his hand caught mine. The touch sent a jolt through me, warm and electric. When I looked back, he was signing again, his movements hurried. "Will you be at tomorrow's hunt festival?" I hesitated. I usually avoided pack gatherings when possible, but "Yes," I signed, "I'll be there." Something flickered in his amber eyes. Hope, perhaps. Before he released my hand and stepped back into the shadows, I returned to the hall, just as King Magnus rose to begin the traditional solstice blessing. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on their imposing leader. I slipped through the crowd to find Elise, but found my gaze drawn repeatedly to where Evander sat beside his father. His face had returned to that careful blankness. But once, just once, his eyes met mine across the crowded room. That night, I dreamed of hands dancing in moonlight, speaking words that voices never could. Morning came with a flurry of activity as the pack prepared for the hunt festival. Unlike the formal solstice gathering, the hunt was held in the forest clearing, a day of competitions and feasting meant to showcase the strength of our warriors. "You're actually coming?" Elise asked as I braided my hair. "You haven't attended a hunt in years." "I thought it was time for a change," I said, avoiding her curious gaze. Our small cottage sat at the edge of the territory, close enough to the human town that we could sometimes hear their cars on the distant highway. It had been our grandmother's home, passed down to us after her death. Most pack members lived in the communal dwellings near the Alpha's compound, but we preferred our isolation, Elise because her failed mating had made her the subject of gossip, and me because, well, I had always been an outsider. As we walked toward the clearing, I found myself scanning the gathering crowd. Would he remember our brief exchange? Would he acknowledge me at all in the light of day? The clearing buzzed with energy. Warriors practiced combat moves while others set up targets for the archery competition. Pups chased each other through the snow, their laughter bright in the winter air. The smell of roasting meat and pine smoke filled my lungs. "Aurora!" "Elise!" A friendly voice called out. Maya, one of the few pack members who treated us with genuine warmth, waved us over. Her mate Theo stood beside her, their young son clinging to his leg. "I didn't expect to see you here," Maya said, hugging me, "but I'm glad you came." We chatted easily, and for a moment, I felt almost normal, just another pack member enjoying the festival. Then a hush fell over the clearing as King Magnus arrived with his entourage. Evander walked half a step behind his father, dressed in hunting leathers like the other warriors, though everyone knew he wouldn't participate in the competitions. His gaze swept the clearing, pausing when it reached our small group. For a heartbeat, our eyes locked, and I felt a flutter in my chest. "The prince is staring at you," Elise whispered, incredulous. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered, though my cheeks warmed. The competitions began with a display of strength, warriors lifting massive logs cut from ancient trees. The crowd cheered as Damon hoisted his above his head longer than anyone else. His triumphant gaze found me in the crowd, and his smile turned predatory. "He's been asking about you," Maya murmured, following my gaze. "Be careful, Aurora." I nodded, discomfort crawling up my spine. Traditionally, the victor of each competition could request a token from any unmated female. I prayed Damon wouldn't choose me. The archery contest followed, then tracking and speed trials. Throughout it all, Evander sat beside his father, watching with that same inscrutable expression. Occasionally, I would feel his gaze on me, but whenever I looked his way, he was focused on the competitions. "And now," announced Elder Thorn, "the combat trials will begin." Warriors paired off in the center of the clearing, fighting until one submitted. I never enjoyed this display of dominance, the violence that our kind seemed to revel in. I was about to suggest to Elise that we visit the refreshment tables when Damon stepped forward. "I challenge the Alpha Prince," he called, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent clearing. Beside me, Maya gasped. "He can't do that. The prince doesn't—" But Evander was already rising, shrugging off his formal cloak. King Magnus grabbed his arm, his face thunderous, but Evander gently removed his father's hand and stepped into the circle. Damon smirked, cracking his knuckles. "No hard feelings, my prince. Just thought you might want a chance to prove yourself for once." Evander's expression remained calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Everyone knew that while alphas possessed superior strength and speed, omegas had heightened senses and agility. Betas, like Damon, fell somewhere in between. Not as powerful as alphas, but generally stronger than omegas. But Evander's muteness had always caused rumors that he wasn't a true alpha, that something was broken in him beyond just his voice. "This is wrong," I whispered. "Damon knows the prince can't call for submission verbally." The combat began, Damon immediately launching into an aggressive attack. To everyone's surprise, Evander moved with fluid grace, dodging the first several blows with ease. When Damon connected with a punch to his ribs, Evander barely flinched before countering with a strike of his own. They were evenly matched, I realized. Whatever assumptions the pack had made about Evander's capabilities, they had been wrong. He fought with calculated precision, each move deliberate, almost as if he were holding back. Then Damon landed a vicious blow to Evander's throat, directly over his scar. The prince staggered, his face contorting in pain. The crowd gasped. Even those who enjoyed combat recognized the dishonorable move. "Submit," Damon growled, pressing his advantage. Something inside me snapped. Before I could think better of it, my hands were moving, signing frantically from the edge of the circle. "Duck left. He telegraphs before he strikes." Evander's eyes found mine for a split second. He ducked left just as Damon's fist whistled through the air where his head had been. In that moment of imbalance, Evander swept Damon's legs from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. In an instant, the prince was above him, one knee pressed to his throat, the position of victory. The crowd erupted in cheers, but I barely heard them. Evander's gaze was still fixed on mine, a silent question in his eyes. "My grandmother was a healer," I signed quickly. "She taught me to observe patterns in movement." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, before he rose and offered a hand to Damon. The defeated warrior took it reluctantly, his eyes burning with humiliation and rage. "The prince is victorious," Elder Thorn announced. "He may claim a token." My heart stuttered as Evander's eyes once again found mine across the clearing. Would he? A commotion at the edge of the forest interrupted the moment. A scout burst into the clearing, his clothes torn, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Rogues!" he gasped. "At the northern border. They've taken hostages from the hunting party." The festival dissolved into chaos. Warriors gathered around King Magnus as he barked orders. Mothers rushed to collect their children, and the elders began ushering non-combatants toward the safety of the compound. In the confusion, I lost sight of Evander. Elise grabbed my arm, pulling me toward home, but I resisted. "We need to help," I insisted. "We'll just be in the way," she argued. "This is why we have warriors." But something told me this was different. Rogue attacks weren't uncommon, but taking hostages was unusual. Rogues typically struck quickly and retreated. This felt planned, deliberate. As the clearing emptied, I made my decision. "Go home," I told Elise. "I'll meet you there." Before she could protest, I slipped away, following the warriors at a distance as they headed north. I didn't know what I could do to help, but I knew I couldn't sit safely at home while others were in danger. What I didn't realize was that I was being watched and followed. The northern forest grew denser as I followed the warriors' trail, the afternoon light filtering through bare branches in weak, golden shafts. Snow crunched beneath my boots, and I cursed myself for not changing into warmer clothes before embarking on this foolish mission. What exactly did I plan to do? An Omega with no combat training? No weapons, no status to command respect? What help could I possibly offer? Yet something pulled me forward. Perhaps it was the memory of Evander's eyes finding mine across the clearing, or the way his hands had moved in response to mine. The first real connection I'd felt in years. I paused, crouching behind a fallen log as voices drifted through the trees ahead. The warriors had stopped in a small clearing, forming a semicircle around King Magnus. From my position, I could just make out his commanding figure, his hand resting on the hilt of the ceremonial blade at his hip. "The scout said they're holding the hostages in the old trapper's cabin," he was saying. "6 rogues, heavily armed. 4 of our pack members captured." I strained to see Evander among the gathered warriors, but couldn't spot him from my hiding place. "We split into 2 groups," the king continued. "Damon, you take 6 men and approach from the east. I'll lead the frontal assault. Remember, the priority is the hostages' safety." My heart sank. A direct assault would put the hostages at risk. Rogues were unpredictable, often desperate. Cornered, they might do anything. I slipped away, moving parallel to the warriors, but veering slightly west. If memory served, there was an old game trail that led behind the trapper's cabin. My grandmother had shown it to me years ago when we'd gathered herbs in this part of the forest. The light was fading fast now, the winter sun surrendering to an early dusk. The temperature dropped, and my breath clouded before me as I picked my way carefully through undergrowth. My Omega senses, while not giving me the strength of an alpha, provided exceptional hearing and smell. I could detect the faint scent of smoke from what must be the cabin, and underneath it, the acrid tang of fear. A twig snapped behind me. I froze, every instinct screaming danger. Slowly, I turned to find Damon standing a few paces back, his expression a mixture of anger and cruel amusement. "Following the warriors, little Omega?" he asked, his voice low. "Or just the prince?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I want to help the hostages." "Interesting timing, right after you helped the prince humiliate me." His eyes glittered dangerously in the fading light. I wonder what Magnus would think if he knew his precious son was consorting with a rejected Omega. "We weren't... I saw you signing to him, during our match and at the solstice gathering." He stepped closer, invading my space. "You think you're clever, don't you? Finding a way to communicate with him that no one else bothers with." Fear coiled in my stomach. Not for myself, but for what this might mean for Evander. Wolves like Damon would use any perceived weakness against a rival. "It doesn't matter," I said, trying to move past him. "Right now, what matters is helping the hostages." His hand shot out, gripping my arm painfully. "It does matter. The prince isn't fit to lead. He never was. If the pack sees him relying on an Omega, a rejected one at that." He smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "My path to captaincy was just the first step. The implications of his words chilled me more than the winter air. Ambition in our pack was expected, but this sounded like something darker, a plot against the royal line itself. A rustling in the underbrush saved me from having to respond. We both turned to see Evander emerge from between the trees, his expression thunderous when he saw Damon's grip on my arm. "My prince," Damon said smoothly, immediately releasing me. "I was just escorting this Omega back to safety. She was foolishly trailing the war party." Evander's gaze flicked from Damon to me, a question in his eyes. "He's lying," I said aloud, before raising my hands to sign. "He threatened me, said things about you, about us communicating." Damon's face hardened. "See how she tries to turn you against me? This is what Omegas do, my prince. They manipulate, using weakness to their advantage." Evander's expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered in his amber eyes. He made a sharp gesture toward the direction the king had gone, clearly telling Damon to join the others. For a moment, I thought Damon might refuse. The tension between them crackled like lightning before a storm. Then Damon inclined his head in a mockery of respect. "As you wish, my prince. But remember, your father ordered us to keep to the plan." With one last warning look at me, he disappeared into the trees. Once he was gone, Evander turned to me, his hands moving rapidly. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous." "I want to help," I signed back. "I know these woods better than most warriors. There's a back way to the cabin." He frowned. "You should return to safety. While you go alone, I heard what Damon said about your father's plan. A direct assault puts the hostages at risk." Frustration crossed his features, quickly replaced by resignation. He knew I was right. "Show me this path," he signed, "but stay behind me." We moved swiftly through the darkening forest, my knowledge of the terrain guiding us along forgotten game trails. The moon rose, casting silver light through the bare branches above. In another circumstance, I might have found the quiet beauty of the winter woods calming, but now every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. "Why did you come alone?" I signed when we paused to listen for sounds of the rogues. "Not alone," he responded. "Scout party. Others are positioned around the perimeter." I nodded, relieved he hadn't simply struck out on his own. "Why did you help me?" he asked suddenly, his hands hesitant. "During the combat." I considered my answer carefully. "Because Damon fights dishonorably, and because—" I paused, uncertain how to express the pull I felt toward him, this wordless connection that defied pack hierarchy. "Because?" he prompted. "Because no one should stand alone," I finished lamely, looking away. When I glanced back, something soft had entered his expression, making him look younger, more vulnerable than the stoic prince the pack knew. The moment was broken by a distant shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of combat. The king's assault had begun. Evander tensed, his hands forming a quick command. "Stay here. I'll circle behind during the distraction." I shook my head fiercely. "I'm coming with you. I can help." His jaw tightened, but he didn't waste time arguing. We approached the cabin cautiously, using the shadows for cover. The structure was small and dilapidated, with a single window emitting the orange glow of lamplight. At the front, we could hear the commotion of the king's warriors engaging the rogues, but the rear remained unguarded. Evander motioned for me to wait as he crept closer to peer through the grimy back window. After a moment, he returned, his hands moving urgently. "2 rogues inside with the hostages. The others are fighting out front. Can we get in without them seeing?" He nodded, pointing to a small door on the side, likely a former coal chute or storage access. "I'll go first," he signed. "If anything happens to me, run." Before I could protest, he was moving, his footsteps soundless on the snow-covered ground. I followed, my heart pounding so loudly I feared the rogues would hear it. The side entrance was small and partially blocked by debris, but Evander managed to clear enough space for us to squeeze through. We found ourselves in what must have once been a storage pantry, now empty except for broken shelves and years of dust. Through a crack in the inner door, I could see into the main room of the cabin. 4 pack members sat bound on the floor. 2 younger warriors I recognized from training sessions, an older woman who worked in the kitchens, and to my horror, Maya's young son. tears streaking his dirty face. The rogues paced nervously, one peering out the front window at the battle, while the other kept a wicked-looking knife trained on the hostages. "They're not backing down," the one at the window growled. "This isn't going according to plan." "Then we use the leverage," the other replied, grabbing the boy roughly by the arm. He screamed, a high, terrified sound that made my blood run cold. Evander's body tensed beside me. I knew what he was thinking. There was no time for subtlety now. He would have to act, and quickly. "Distraction," I signed rapidly. "I'll create one. You free the hostages." Before he could stop me, I grabbed a broken shelf and threw it against the outer wall with all my strength. The crash echoed through the cabin, and both rogues whirled toward the sound. "What was that?" one snarled. "Check it out, I'll watch them." The moment the first rogue moved toward our hiding place, Evander burst through the door. What happened next was a blur of motion too fast for me to follow. The prince moved with lethal grace, disarming the rogue with the knife before the man could even register his presence. The hostages scrambled back as Evander engaged both attackers simultaneously. I darted from my hiding place to the bound captives, using the small knife I kept in my boot to slice through their bindings. "Get behind me," I whispered, positioning myself between them and the fight. Evander was holding his own against both rogues, but I could see he was intentionally keeping them away from the hostages, rather than pressing his advantage. One of the rogues, realizing they were losing the upper hand, made a desperate lunge toward us. Without thinking, I stepped forward, driving my small knife into his outstretched arm. He howled in pain, reeling back, directly into Evander's waiting grasp. In one smooth motion, the prince rendered him unconscious. The remaining rogue, seeing his companion fall, broke for the door. He didn't make it 3 steps before King Magnus himself burst through the entrance, his face a mask of cold fury. The rogue dropped to his knees immediately, surrender written in every line of his body. In the sudden stillness that followed, I became acutely aware of every pair of eyes fixed on me, the Omega who should never have been there, knife still clutched in my bloodied hand. The king's gaze was particularly unsettling, moving from me to his son and back again with unreadable intensity. Maya's son broke the silence, running to me and throwing his arms around my waist. "You saved us," he whispered. I knelt to his level, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, his small fingers moving in a clumsy approximation of the signs I had taught him during the quiet afternoons when Maya brought him to our cottage. "Not hurt. Scared, I know," I murmured, smoothing his hair. "But you're safe now." When I looked up, Evander was watching us, something like wonder in his expression. Beside him, the king's face had softened almost imperceptibly. "Take the prisoners to the compound," Magnus ordered his warriors, "and escort the hostages to the healers." His eyes fell on me again, all of them. As the cabin emptied, I found myself walking beside Evander, the king a few paces ahead. The victory should have felt triumphant, but Damon's earlier words echoed in my mind. What would happen now that I had inserted myself into pack business? Now that the king had seen his son communicating with a rejected Omega? "Thank you," Evander signed discreetly as we walked. "For what?" I asked, keeping my movements small and close to my body. His eyes met mine, warm despite the cold night air. "For speaking when everyone else was silent." Dawn broke with a heavy snowfall that blanketed the territory in pristine white. I stood at the window of our cottage, watching the flakes swirl and dance in the morning light. Sleep had eluded me, my mind replaying the events at the cabin, the feel of the knife in my hand, the look in Evander's eyes when he signed those words to me, for speaking when everyone else was silent. "You should sit down and eat something," Elise said, placing a steaming bowl on our small table. "You've been standing there for an hour." I turned reluctantly from the window. "I'm not hungry." "Aurora." My sister's voice softened with concern. "You can't hide in here forever. The whole pack is talking about what happened." Of course they were. The rejected Omega who helped the mute prince rescue hostages. It was the kind of story that would spread like wildfire, growing more embellished with each retelling. "What are they saying?" I asked, finally joining her at the table. Elise hesitated. "Different things. Some say you were brave. Others..." She looked away. Others say you overstepped, that you put yourself and the prince in danger. I pushed the food around my bowl, and what do you think? I think my little sister has secrets. She reached across the table to take my hand. You never told me you could speak with the prince. Heat rose to my cheeks. It wasn't a secret exactly. It just happened. At the solstice gathering, when I nodded, she squeezed my hand. Maya told me you've been teaching her son the hand language. She's grateful, you know. Says he feels special knowing something others don't. A knock at the door interrupted us, making us both jump. Visitors were rare at our isolated cottage. Elise rose to answer it, her face paling when she saw who stood on our threshold. Your Majesty, she breathed, dropping into a hasty bow. King Magnus filled the doorframe, his imposing figure made even larger by his heavy winter cloak. Behind him stood two of his personal guard, their expressions impassive. I rose quickly, my knees threatening to buckle beneath me. Aurora. The king spoke my name with surprising softness. I would speak with you. Elise shot me a worried look before nodding. Of course. Please come in, Your Majesty. Can I offer you tea? That won't be necessary, he said, stepping into our modest home. His gaze took in our simple furnishings, lingering on the shelves that still held my grandmother's books and healing supplies. I won't be long. My sister hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and protectiveness. I'll be in the garden, she said finally, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze before slipping out the back door. Alone with the Alpha King, I struggled to find my voice. Should I kneel? Bow my head? What was the protocol when royalty appeared at your door? Sit, he said, gesturing to the table. It wasn't a request. I sank back into my chair, watching as he settled his massive frame across from me, dismissing his guards to wait outside with a flick of his hand. You're not what I expected, he said after a moment of studied silence. I kept my eyes lowered. I'm sorry if I overstepped last night, Your Majesty. Overstepped? He made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it contained little humor. You disobeyed direct orders, followed a war party into dangerous territory, and inserted yourself into a hostage situation. Each word fell like a stone, building a wall of accusation around me. I'm sorry, I whispered again, fingers clutching my grandmother's pendant through my sweater. Are you? His voice had that same surprising gentleness. Because when I look at you, Aurora, I don't see regret. I see a young woman who knew exactly what she was doing. I looked up then, startled by his use of my name, by the lack of condemnation in his tone. My son tells me you learned the hand language from your grandmother, he continued, the healer who lived at the edge of our territory. I nodded. She believed in preserving old knowledge. As did my wife. For a moment, pain flickered across his stern features. She taught Evander after his accident, but when she died, he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window. No one else bothered to learn. I thought it didn't matter, that he would find other ways to lead. The admission stunned me. I had never imagined the king harboring such thoughts, such regrets. But I was wrong, he continued. A king who cannot communicate with his people cannot truly lead them. Evander communicates, I said, finding a sudden boldness. Just not in the way others expect. Magnus's eyes returned to me, sharp and assessing. Yes, I saw that last night. He has spoken more with you in 2 days than he has with anyone in 5 years. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. We've barely spoken, Your Majesty. Yet you understand each other. He leaned forward, his massive hands folded on the table between us. Tell me, Aurora, what do you see when you look at my son? The question caught me off guard. What did I see? The quiet strength, the patience, the isolation that mirrored my own, the way his eyes betrayed emotions his face never showed. I see someone who watches and listens when others only speak, I said finally. Someone who has learned to be still in a world that values noise and force. Something shifted in the king's expression. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. The council is meeting tonight, he said, changing direction abruptly. To discuss the rogue attack and other matters. I want you there. I blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm not. You were there. You helped save pack members. He rose, towering over me. And you can communicate with my son in a way no one else can. It wasn't a request. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. One more thing, he said, his back to me. Why do they call you the rejected? The question hung in the air between us. I've never quite fit the expectations of what an Omega should be, I answered carefully. He turned his head slightly. And what should an Omega be? Submissive, I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Quiet, content with their place. Yet you are none of those things. There was that almost smile again. Gone so quickly I might have imagined it. The council meets at moonrise. Do not be late. With that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the center of our cottage, my world tilting on its axis. Elise burst in moments later, her face flushed with cold and excitement. What did he want? Are you in trouble? Tell me everything. I sank back into my chair, still processing the conversation. He wants me at the council meeting tonight. What? She stared at me in disbelief. Omegas aren't allowed at council meetings. Apparently this one is. I looked up at her, anxiety and a strange hope warring in my chest. Elise, what does it mean? She shook her head slowly. I don't know. But something is changing, Aurora. And somehow you're at the center of it. The council chambers were located in the oldest part of the Alpha's compound, a circular stone room with high windows that let in the silver glow of the rising moon. By the time I arrived, guided by a stern-faced guard, most of the seats around the massive oak table were filled. Elder Thorn, his white beard nearly reaching the middle of his chest, sat at the king's right hand. The other counselors, all high-ranking alphas and betas, regarded me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility as I was led to an empty chair. Directly across from me sat Evander, his face as impassive as ever, though his eyes brightened when they met mine. Beside him was an empty seat, the king's place, still vacant though the meeting hour had come. At the far end of the table, Damon lounged with calculated casualness, his dark eyes following me like a predator tracking wounded prey. When our gazes locked, he smiled, cold and threatening. The doors swung open, and King Magnus entered, his presence immediately commanding the room. All rose until he took his seat, then settled back with a rustle of fabric and creaking of chairs. We face uncertain times, the king began without preamble. Yesterday's attack was not random. The rogues targeted specific individuals and had inside knowledge of our patrol routes. Murmurs rippled around the table. We have questioned the prisoners, he continued. They were hired, paid well to execute a plan designed to create fear and disorder within our pack. Hired by whom? Elder Thorn asked, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concern. That remains unclear, Magnus replied. But there are rumors of a coalition forming among the southern territories, packs who believe our bloodline has grown weak. All eyes flicked briefly to Evander, whose expression remained neutral, though I caught the slight tensing of his jaw. Which brings us to the matter of succession, the king said, his voice hardening. My son will reach his 30th year this coming spring. As tradition dictates, he must either take a mate and solidify his claim to leadership, or the council may propose alternative successors from strong bloodlines. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Evander didn't mate soon, he could lose his birthright. I glanced at Damon, whose smirk had widened at the king's words. Suddenly, his ambitions became clear. He wasn't just after the captaincy. With all due respect, Your Majesty, one of the older counselors spoke. The prince's condition makes traditional courtship difficult. Perhaps an arranged match with a neighboring pack? My son's condition, as you call it, does not affect his ability to lead, Magnus interrupted sharply, as was demonstrated yesterday when he successfully rescued our pack members. With help, Damon interjected smoothly, from an Omega. His gaze slid to me, laden with meaning, the council chamber filled with whispers. Yes, the king agreed, silencing the room. With help from someone who bothered to learn how to communicate with him, he gestured toward me. Aurora has demonstrated the value of the old ways, the silent language that many of our ancestors used before the change. I believe it would benefit our pack to revive this knowledge. Elder Thorn stroked his beard thoughtfully. The old ways have wisdom, he conceded. But how does this address the matter of succession? I propose that Aurora serve as my son's interpreter and advisor, Magnus said, his declaration sending a shockwave through the room. She will attend council meetings, diplomatic functions, and pack gatherings at his side, bridging the gap between his silent language and our spoken words. I sat frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Me? Advisor to the prince? It was unprecedented, impossible. An Omega as royal advisor? One counselor scoffed. And a rejected one at that. The other packs would see it as a sign of weakness. I disagree, Magnus countered. They would see innovation, adaptation, qualities essential for survival. And what of the succession? Damon pressed, his voice hardening. An advisor does not secure the bloodline. The king's gaze was steel. One step at a time, Captain. First, we strengthen our prince's voice within the pack. The rest will follow. I dared to look at Evander, finding his eyes already on me, intense and questioning. Carefully, keeping my hands low, I signed, "Did you know?" He shook his head slightly, then signed back, "Do you accept?" Did I? The weight of what was being offered pressed on my chest. This wasn't just about me or Evander. It was about challenging centuries of pack hierarchy, of stepping into a spotlight I had spent my life avoiding. But looking into his amber eyes, seeing the carefully guarded hope there, I knew my answer. "Yes," I signed. "I accept." Evander's lips curved into the ghost of a smile, there and gone in an instant. Across the table, Damon's eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm against the polished wood. "Then it is settled," the king announced, either missing or ignoring the silent exchange. "Aurora will begin her duties immediately. Her first task will be to teach the silent language to the council and the royal guard." As the meeting continued, plans forming for increased security and diplomatic outreach, I felt the future reshaping itself around me. For better or worse, my life would never be the same. Neither would Damon's plans, whatever they might be. The look he gave me as the council adjourned promised that this was far from over. 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Each morning, I traveled from our cottage to the Alpha's compound, where I divided my time between teaching the silent language to council members and accompanying Evander to various pack functions. The afternoons were often spent in the archives, where Evander showed me ancient texts documenting pack history, knowledge passed down through generations of Alpha heirs that few outside the royal line ever saw. My life had transformed so completely that sometimes I would wake in the pre-dawn darkness, convinced it had all been an elaborate dream. But then I would rise, dress in the new clothes the king had ordered for me, simple but finely made garments that marked my new position, and step into a reality that still felt surreal. "You look tired," Elise remarked one morning as she braided my hair. She had insisted on helping me prepare for an important meeting with representatives from a neighboring pack. "Are they working you too hard?" "No," I said, though exhaustion did pull at my limbs. "It's just a lot to adjust to." What I didn't tell her was how the constant scrutiny wore on me. The whispers that followed me through corridors, the pointed stares, the mixture of awe and resentment that greeted me at every turn. Some embraced the changes, particularly the younger pack members who eagerly attended my language classes. Others, especially those aligned with Damon, made no effort to hide their disapproval. Damon himself had been suspiciously quiet since the council meeting. He performed his duties as captain with rigid efficiency, but I often caught him watching me, his eyes calculating, waiting. "There's something else," Elise said, her fingers pausing in their work. "Something you're not telling me." I met her eyes in the mirror, seeing the worry etched in her features. "It's nothing. Aurora." She turned me to face her. "We've never kept secrets from each other." She was right. And yet, how could I explain the complicated emotions that had begun to bloom between Evander and me? The lingering glances, the brush of his fingers against mine when we passed documents, the way our signing had evolved to include private jokes and observations that no one else could understand. I began, then hesitated. "I think I'm beginning to care for him, more than I should." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The prince?" I nodded, heat rising to my cheeks. "Oh, Aurora," she sighed. Not with disapproval, but with the weary knowledge of someone who had seen how pack politics could crush personal feelings. You know what they expect of him, what the succession demands. I know, I whispered. An alpha prince did not mate with a rejected omega, no matter how useful she might temporarily be. His match would be strategic, a strong alpha female from another pack, or perhaps a beta of impeccable bloodline. My role was to facilitate, not to complicate. Just be careful, Elise said, resuming her braiding. Your heart isn't the only one that could break. The neighboring pack's representatives arrived at midday. 3 imposing wolves led by their beta commander, Lyle. King Magnus received them in the formal reception hall, with Evander and me standing slightly behind his throne. I wore my position like an ill-fitting coat, constantly aware of the scrutiny from both our visitors and our own pack members gathered to witness the proceedings. Welcome to Silverthorn territory, the king greeted them. We are honored by your presence and look forward to strengthening the bonds between our packs. Lyle, a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair, inclined his head respectfully. Alpha King Magnus, we bring greetings from Alpha Serrano. She regrets she could not come herself, but sent us to discuss the matter of mutual defense against these hired rogues who threaten our lands. The formalities continued, with Magnus introducing Evander and explaining my role as interpreter. Lyle's eyebrows rose slightly at this, but he made no comment. Instead, he turned his attention directly to the prince. We have heard much about you, Prince Evander, he said. Your reputation as a warrior has spread, especially after the recent hostage rescue. I translated his words into signs, and Evander responded with careful movements of his hands. The credit belongs to many, including Aurora, who risked herself to help our pack members. As I translated this aloud, Lyle's gaze sharpened on me. Indeed, most unusual for an Omega to involve themselves in such matters. Aurora is not most Omegas, Magnus interjected smoothly. Now, shall we discuss the reason for your visit? The meeting proceeded, focusing on shared patrols and information exchange about suspicious activities along our borders. Throughout it all, I felt Lyle watching me with keen interest whenever I translated for Evander. As the formal portion concluded and attendants began serving refreshments, Lyle approached me directly. Your skill with the silent language is impressive, he said. Where did you learn it? My grandmother taught me, I replied, careful to maintain the respectful tone expected when addressing a high-ranking beta from another pack. Interesting. He tilted his head. You know, in our pack, we have several wolves who use this language. Alpha Serrano believes in preserving such knowledge. A wise perspective, I said, genuinely surprised. In our territory, the silent language had been largely forgotten until recent events brought it back to prominence. Perhaps you and the prince might visit our territory sometime, Lyle suggested. Alpha Serrano would be most interested to meet you both. Before I could respond, a cool presence materialized at my side. Damon, who had been notably absent from the formal proceedings. Captain Damon Reed, he introduced himself to Lyle with a sharp smile. I see you've met our prince's assistant. The slight pause before the word turned it into something diminishing. I felt my shoulders tense. Interpreter, Lyle corrected mildly. An important role, especially in diplomatic matters. He glanced between us, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension. If you'll excuse me, I should rejoin my companions. As he walked away, Damon leaned closer to me, his voice pitched low. Making friends with our neighbors? How ambitious of you, little Omega. I was doing my job, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Were you? His eyes gleamed with malice, because from where I stand, it looked like you were getting rather familiar with the prince during the meeting. All those private signs, those little glances, he tisked softly. People are beginning to talk, you know. I slid down my spine. There's nothing to talk about. No? He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Then you won't mind if I share my observations with the council? How the prince seems increasingly distracted by his interpreter, how it might be affecting his judgment. I wanted to walk away, to find Evander or the king, but Damon's next words froze me in place. I wonder what happens to rejected Omegas who reach above their station. who threaten the royal succession with inappropriate attachments. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, finding a thread of steel in my voice. "Not at all." He straightened, adjusting his ceremonial uniform, simply observing. After all, that's what good captains do. Observe potential threats to the pack's stability. With a mock bow, he left me standing alone, my hands trembling at my sides. Later that evening, as the visitors retired to their guest quarters, I found myself wandering the quiet corridors of the compound, seeking solitude to process Damon's veiled threats. My feet carried me to the eastern gallery, a long hallway lined with portraits of past alpha kings and queens. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Evander until he was directly beside me, his presence a warm certainty in the dimly lit space. "You're troubled," he signed, his eyes searching mine. "It's nothing," I replied, the lie clumsy in my hands. His expression made it clear he didn't believe me. "Damon?" I hesitated, then nodded. "He noticed things between us." "What things?" Evander asked, though the intensity in his gaze suggested he already knew. How to explain what had grown between us these past weeks? The silent conversations that extended far beyond the necessary translations. The way he had begun teaching me the history and traditions of the pack, knowledge traditionally reserved for those in the line of succession. The growing trust, the shared smiles, the unmistakable pull that drew me to him despite every practical consideration. "He thinks I'm forgetting my place," I signed finally, the movements sharp with frustration. Evander's jaw tightened. "Your place is where you choose it to be." "Is it? In a world of alphas and hierarchy and succession?" I turned away, gazing up at the stern faces of his ancestors lining the walls. "We both know what's expected of you, Evander." He moved to stand before me, blocking my view of the portraits. His hands rose, then hesitated, as if struggling to find the right signs. "What if I want something different than what's expected?" My heart stuttered in my chest. "Don't," I signed. "Don't say things that can't be." His expression softened, a vulnerability there I'd rarely seen. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed at the far end of the gallery. We both turned to see King Magnus approaching, his face grave in the flickering torchlight. "There you are," he said, his voice oddly strained. "I've been looking for you both." Something in his tone sent a chill through me. "What's happened?" "One of our patrols found evidence of intruders at the southern border," Magnus said, "and this." He held out a small object that gleamed dully in his palm, a silver pendant, identical to the one I wore beneath my dress. My grandmother's pendant. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "On a courier who tried to slip past our borders," the king replied. "A courier carrying messages between the rogue mercenaries and their employer." Evander's hands moved in sharp, urgent signs. What did the messages say? Magnus's eyes were cold steel as they met mine. "They contain details about our defenses, our patrol schedules, and information about you, Aurora. Your new position, your relationship with my son." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "I don't understand." The pendant was a signal, identifying the courier as one working for a particular employer, Magnus continued. "Someone who knew about your grandmother, about your connection to her." Realization dawned, sickening and inevitable. "You think I'm involved?" It wasn't a question. "I think," the king said carefully, "that we need to understand why your family's symbol was in the possession of someone working against our pack." Evander stepped forward, his hands flying in adamant denial. "She's not a traitor. I trust her." "This isn't about trust," Magnus replied, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. "This is about the safety of our pack. Until we understand what this means, Aurora will be confined to her quarters." As if summoned by his words, 2 guards appeared at the end of the gallery. "Your Majesty, please," I began, panic rising in my throat. But the king's expression was resolute. "I'm sorry, Aurora. I have no choice." As the guards led me away, I caught one last glimpse of Evander, his face a mask of helpless rage, his hands signing words I couldn't reply to. "I will find the truth. I promise." The room they confined me to was comfortable enough. A guest chamber in the east wing of the compound, with a narrow window that offered a view of the forest beyond the packlands. 2 guards stood outside my door, their presence a constant reminder of my precarious position. My only visitor was a silent beta, who brought meals and removed the trays without meeting my eyes. 3 days passed this way, each hour stretching into an eternity of uncertainty. I paced the small room, examining my grandmother's teachings, our family history, searching for any clue that might explain the pendant found with the courier. Had she been involved with rogues? It seemed impossible. She had dedicated her life to healing, to preserving knowledge that benefited the pack. On the 4th morning, the door opened to admit Elise, her face drawn with worry. We embraced fiercely, holding each other as if the world might tear us apart again at any moment. "Are you all right?" she asked, pulling back to search my face. "Have they treated you well?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just confused, scared." She guided me to sit on the edge of the bed, keeping my hands clasped in hers. "The whole pack is talking. Some say you're a spy, others that you've been framed. What do you think?" I asked quietly. "I think my sister would never betray those she cares about." Her eyes were fierce with conviction. "And I think someone is very determined to remove you from the prince's side." Damon's face flashed in my mind, his veiled threats still ringing in my ears. But how could he have obtained a replica of my grandmother's pendant, and why go to such lengths? "Has there been any news?" I asked. "Any progress in the investigation?" Elise's expression clouded. "The king has been questioning everyone who might have knowledge of the pendant's origins. And the prince..." She hesitated. "What about Evander?" I leaned forward, anxiety tightening my chest. "He's been like a storm, they say, refusing to attend council meetings unless you're released, conducting his own investigation. The king had to order him to maintain his duties." She squeezed my hands. "He believes in you, Aurora." The knowledge was both comfort and pain. If Evander continued to defy his father on my behalf, he risked his position, his future as Alpha. "I need to speak with him," I said, rising to pace the small room. "Or the king. I need to explain..." "Explain what?" Elise asked gently. "We don't even understand what's happening ourselves." She was right. I had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each passing hour. "There's something else," Elise continued, her voice dropping. "Something I remembered about grandmother's pendant." I turned to her sharply. "What?" "She told me once that it was a twin, that there were 2 pendants made, identical in every way. Hers, and another belonging to someone she called her dearest friend." "A twin pendant?" My mind raced. Did she ever say who this friend was? Elise shook her head. "Only that they had parted ways long ago, before either of us was born. But perhaps this friend is still alive. Perhaps they know something that could help." Before I could respond, the door opened again. King Magnus stood in the threshold, his massive frame filling the doorway. Beside him stood Elder Thorn, his ancient face grave. "Leave us," the king commanded Elise, his tone brooking no argument. My sister squeezed my hand once more before slipping past the 2 men, casting a worried glance over her shoulder. The king entered, followed by the elder. Neither sat, remaining standing like sentinels as the door closed behind them. "We've been investigating the courier and the messages he carried," Magnus began without preamble. "The identity of the employer remains elusive, but we've learned something about the pendant." I waited, heart hammering against my ribs. Elder Thorn recognized its design. The king continued, gesturing to the old man. The elder's rheumy eyes fixed on me. "It is an ancient symbol," he said, his voice cracking with age, "one associated with the Crescent Moon Coven." "The Crescent Moon Coven?" I repeated, the name unfamiliar on my tongue. "A group that existed before the Great War," Thorn explained, "when our kind still lived openly among humans. They were different, neither fully wolf nor fully human. They practiced old magic, healing arts, and kept to themselves." "What happened to them?" I asked, though something told me I already knew the answer. "They were among the first casualties when the war began," the king said. "Hunted by humans who feared their abilities, then later by our own kind who considered them impure. Most were wiped out. The survivors went into hiding, allegedly assimilating into various packs. Understanding began to dawn. You think my grandmother was one of them. That I am. The pendant is their mark, Thorn confirmed. And your affinity for the silent language, your healing knowledge, these were crescent moon traits. But what does this have to do with the rogues? With the attacks on our pack? I demanded, frustration rising through my fear. Magnus and Thorn exchanged a look that sent ice through my veins. There are those who believe the Crescent Moon descendants have been working for generations to infiltrate pack leadership, the king said carefully, to reclaim what they see as their rightful place in our society. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think I've been using Evander? That I manipulated my way into a position beside him as part of some generational revenge plot? I don't know what to think, Magnus admitted, and for the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. But the council is demanding answers. Damon has been particularly vocal about the risk you pose. Of course he had. Pieces were falling into place, not about my grandmother or her pendant, but about Damon's ambitions. Your Majesty, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I swear to you that I knew nothing about any Crescent Moon coven. My grandmother never spoke of such things. She taught me healing and the silent language because she believed knowledge should be preserved, not because of some secret agenda. Then how do you explain the pendant with the courier? Thorn challenged. I took a deep breath. My sister just told me that my grandmother's pendant had a twin, identical in every way, belonging to someone she called her dearest friend. And if you found that pendant on the courier, it wasn't mine. I touched the chain around my neck, pulling out my own pendant as proof. Mine has never left me. Magnus's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the silver crescent cradling its tiny star. If what you say is true, he said slowly, then someone who knew about your grandmother's connection to this coven is using it to implicate you. But who would know such ancient history? Thorn wondered aloud. The Crescent Moon has been gone for generations. A knock at the door interrupted us. A guard entered, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. Prince Evander demands to see you immediately. He says it's urgent. About the investigation. Magnus frowned. Where is he? In the archives, Your Majesty. He's found something. The king turned back to me, his expression unreadable. Come, both of you. I followed them through the corridors of the compound, acutely aware of the stairs that tracked our progress. News of my confinement had clearly spread, and speculation hung in the air like smoke. The archives were housed in the oldest part of the compound, a series of underground chambers filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts dating back centuries. We found Evander in the central room, surrounded by ancient texts spread across a massive table. He looked up as we entered, his eyes immediately finding mine with an intensity that made my heart leap. Are you all right? He signed quickly. I nodded, not daring to sign back with so many eyes upon us. What have you found? Magnus demanded. Evander gestured to the materials before him, then began to sign. I translated automatically, my voice growing stronger with each movement of his hands. I've been researching the Crescent Moon Coven and discovered something important. They weren't enemies of the wolf packs. They were allies, healers and mediators who helped negotiate peace between rival territories. I continued translating as his hands flew. More importantly, I found this. He held up an ancient, crumbling letter, its parchment yellow with age. It's a correspondence between Alpha Silverthorn III, your great-grandfather, I translated, and a leader of the Crescent Moon Coven named Ilara. They were not just allies, but friends. The letter speaks of a pact between them, sealed with twin pendants, silver crescents holding stars. Magnus took the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the faded script. This doesn't explain why one of these pendants was found on a courier working against our pack. Evander signed again, his movements emphatic. It might, if we consider who stands to gain from Aurora's removal from her position. Who has been vocal about her unsuitability? Who has ambitions that her presence interferes with? Damon, I said, the name falling from my lips before I could stop it. The king's eyes narrowed. You accuse my captain of guard of treason based on ancient history and speculation. Not speculation, I translated as Evander continued signing. Fact. I've been tracking Damon's movements since Aurora was confined. 3 nights ago, he met with someone at the edge of our territory, a meeting not included in any official report. Magnus's expression darkened. You've been spying on a pack officer without authorization? I've been seeking the truth, Evander signed, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. Something is happening in our pack, Father. Someone is working to undermine us, to create division, and I believe Damon is involved. Before the king could respond, the chamber door burst open. A warrior I recognized from the border patrols stumbled in, blood seeping from a wound on his shoulder. Attack, he gasped. Northern border. Rogues. More than we've ever seen. They've breached the outer defenses. Magnus was instantly transformed, the concerned father replaced by the Alpha King. Sound the alarm. All warriors to battle positions. He turned to Elder Thorn. Get the non-combatants to the safe rooms. As the compound erupted into activity, I found myself caught in the flow, uncertain of my place in this crisis. Evander caught my arm, his eyes burning with determination. Come with me, he signed. I need you. Without waiting for a response, he pulled me toward a side passage that led deeper into the compound. The king, focused on organizing the defense, didn't notice our departure. The passage opened into a small chamber I had never seen before, an armory filled with weapons of all descriptions. Evander moved with purpose, selecting a bow and quiver for himself, and to my surprise, a slender blade that he offered to me. Can you use this? He signed. Yes, I said aloud, taking the knife. My grandmother had insisted I learn basic self-defense, despite it being unusual for Omegas. But what are we doing? Shouldn't we be with the others? His hands moved rapidly, urgently. This isn't a random attack. It's coordinated with something inside the compound. I need you to help me find the real traitor before it's too late. I stared at him, realization dawning. You think Damon planned this? That the attack is a diversion? He nodded grimly. The pendant, the courier, the timing, it's all connected. And I think I know what his true target is. What? I signed, fear coiling in my stomach. Evander's expression was grave as his hands formed the answer. The royal succession. My father, me, everything.